I'd like to call this meeting of Erie County Council on Tuesday, November 30th, 2021 at 7:40 p.m. to order. And this is the 2022 budget meeting. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We want to thank everybody for being with us tonight, and you're showing your patience with us as we had a lot of items to make sure we're taken care of so we can have fiscal accountability and responsibility to the taxpayers of Erie County as we pass the 2022 budget. Tonight, Councilwoman Showerman will lead us in the optional prayer, so please go ahead.
And I chose this in light of Thanksgiving being so close to that, and this will be the shortest thing of the evening. It's be grateful. A grateful heart is a magnet for miracles.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Clear?
Here.
Mr. Horton?
Here.
Mr. Rastetter?
Here.
Mrs. Rennie?
Here.
Mrs. Showerman?
Here.
Mr. Shank?
Here.
Chairman Anderson.
Here. Are there any members of the public that wish to be heard? Are there any members of the public that wish to be heard? And finally, are there any members of the public that wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll continue to move forward with the business of our meeting. Next on our agenda is previous minutes of County Council regular meetings and budget hearings. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second.
Thank you. Councilman Horton, would you friendly amendment to include all 3 minutes in one motion?
Yes.
Thank you. And the second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion to include the October 26th and both minutes of the November 16th meeting by Councilman Horton, seconded by Vice Chairwoman Clear. Are there any comments or questions, members of council, for any of the minutes? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Sparber, does the county executive or her designee have a report this evening?
Not this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sparber. Finance Chairwoman Clear, do you have a report for council this evening?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Today, the Finance Department will be, or sorry, the Finance Committee will be submitting old business items A through T. And I will also mention that we did have a meeting, the Finance Committee, the council people with the Finance Department actually met Saturday, November 19th for approximately, let's see, we began at 9 a.m. and we talked all the way until I want to say 2 o'clock or maybe almost 3. And we discussed almost every single part of the budget. We had a very comprehensive reading of the budget that was presented. And we also went through some of the changes that we would like to see made and had great discussion on that day. So I want to thank the council and the Finance Department and all of the people that work in the County Council office for being there for that long haul, especially our accountant, Miss Amy Swartz-Fager, our CPA, who has done an excellent job keeping us in line and getting us what we needed. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairwoman Clear. And Chairwoman Rennie, do you have any report from the Personnel Committee tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are no specific items for the Personnel Committee. There are items and action sheets within the budgets that you see before you. but no separate personnel items tonight, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council, no other council member had indicated giving a report this evening. So is there any reports that council members have? Seeing none, I would just like to give a quick mention that tomorrow is the 40th anniversary of the Erie County and national and as well as World AIDS Day. And Erie County will be having a program tomorrow in honor of the 40th anniversary at the Glasgow Library, the main branch on the Bayfront at the Hurt Auditorium, beginning at 5 p.m. tomorrow. So we certainly encourage members of the community to come out and learn and also celebrate. And we want to thank Erie County's HIV Task Force and the Erie County Department of Health for their work in this particular area and being on top of these issues on behalf of all of Erie County. So thank you for that. With no other reports from members of council, we'll continue to move forward with the business at hand, and we do have some old business items to deal with in the agenda. And Vice Chairwoman Clear?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would like to amend the agenda to add ordinance 121. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion, the motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Showerman. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, can we have a roll call vote then to amend the agenda to include ordinance 121?
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. Thank you. And Vice Chairwoman Clear, do you have a further amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. I would like to make I would like to make a motion to move ordinance number 121 to a second.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to move the ordinance to a second by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Showerman. And are there any other comments or questions or discussions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would also like to make a motion to add in this language to the ordinance 121. Once the ARPA funding is received, the ARPA funding will be placed into a restricted account and remain in the restricted account until a progress report with presentation parameters set forth by council is given by every individual bureau. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, can we have a roll call vote on the second reading as amended?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just before you vote, I just want to make sure we're clear. This motion to place it into a restricted account, that doesn't nullify our line items, correct? We're restricting all of our line items. I think
Restricting the line
that would
item.
be the phrase you might want, Mrs. Clear.
Yep, restricting the line item.
Mr. Chairman, may
Go ahead.
I rephrase that?
Yes.
Once the ARPA funding is received, the ARPA funding will be placed in restricted line items.
All the line items will be restricted.
All of the, okay, so the ARP funding, all of the line items of the ARP funding will be in will be restricted.
There we are.
Thank you, Amy.
You want me to read that back
Second.
again?
Well, and then Adele. You
I'm
want
going to reread it
the
again,
whole-
just so that it's formally in the books here. Once ARPA funding is received, all of the line items will be restricted and remain there until a progress report with presentation parameters set forth by council is given by every individual bureau.
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion from Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. So, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on a second reading of 121 as amended?
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we now have a second reading of ordinance number 115?
Do you want it in its entirety or in title?
In title only, I'm sorry. Thank you.
A second reading of ordinance number 115, 2021, appointment of members to the Erie County Rail Futures Commission.
So moved?
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please, on ordinance 115?
Mr. Chairman, this will be inclusive of all the names listed on the ordinance,
Yes.
rather than individual votes on them. I just
Uh,
want to make it clear for the record.
Yes.
Thank you.
Voting in its entirety.
On ordinance 115 with members' names included,
Yeah, actually, Mr. Smith, maybe I should have asked you to at least read the names. I know we did that in the first reading, but I think it would be appropriate to read them again for the record.
from District 1, Kim Clear nominates Mark Restifo. For District 2, Andre Horton nominates Cindy Purvis. District 3, Mary Rennie nominates Brian Pitzer. District 4, Carl Anderson nominates Alan Thayer. District 5, Brian Shank nominates Ray Grabowski. District 6, Scott Rastetter nominates David Skelly. District 7, Ellen Showerman nominates Kevin Garvin.
Thank you. Then can we have a roll call vote, please?
On ordinance 115, Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we also have a second reading of ordinance number 116 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 116, 2021. Approving the Erie County Community College budget for 2022.
So moved?
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
On ordinance 116, Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Next, we have a second reading of ordinance number 93, the 2022 debt service fund budget. Mr. Smith, maybe you just give that to us in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 93, 2021, 2022 debt service fund budget.
So moved?
Second.
We have a motion by Councilwoman, Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote? And then should we go through the action items? This one doesn't have any, but
That's
we'll
correct,
start the
Mr.
action
Chairman.
item. And at the end of each action item section, will we vote on that ordinance? Is that how?
Once the action items are voted on, if they're passed, then council will vote on the ordinance as amended and potentially on the face sheet as amended if that changes.
Thank you. So may we have a roll call vote when you're ready?
On ordinance 93, Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, should we make a motion for a first and second on the ordinance and then do the face sheets and then vote as amended? Or do you want to just do the motion?
There's generally a motion and a second given to the ordinance, and then Mrs. Clear will make her motion to amend if it's appropriate with those action sheets.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if there's none, then we'll just,
Correct.
Continue
Just
to
vote
take
on
the
the
vote.
ordinance as presented.
okay, thank you. Then could we have a second reading of ordinance number 94 in title only?
A second reading of ordinance 94, 2021, 2022 Employee Fringe Benefit Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to amend the ordinance to include action sheets 1 and 2 and vote on them as one.
Seeing no action items, then are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Then, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the fringe benefits ordinance?
On ordinance 94, Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Is it all right, or would it be easier if I didn't hand them up and wait till the end? Okay, all right.
Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 95 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 95, 2021, 2022 Health Choices Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilman Horton.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
now I would like to amend the ordinance to include the action sheets numbers 1 and 2 on one as, and vote as one vote. Two.
We have a motion for the two action sheets by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilman Horton. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, can we have a roll call vote on the motion for the action sheet?
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Thank you. I will now entertain a motion for ordinance 95 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to amend ordinance number 95 by Councilman Horton, seconded by Vice Chairwoman Clear. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance 95 as amended?
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
No change on the numbers? Okay.
Mr. Smith, may we now have a second reading on ordinance number 96 in title only?
A second reading of ordinance number 96, 2021, 2022 Mental Health Intellectual Disabilities Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I would like to amend the ordinance to include action sheets number 1 and 2 and vote on them as one.
Second.
We have a motion for the two action sheets as one item by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
On the amendments, Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. I'll now entertain a motion on ordinance 96 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion being made by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any last comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance 96 as amended?
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
No numbers? Okay.
Mr. Smith, may we have a reading of ordinance number 97 in title only?
Second reading of ordinance number 97, 2021, 2022 Drug and Alcohol Abuse Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to I'd like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include action sheets number 1 and 2 and to vote vote together as one vote.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
On the proposed amendments, Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Smith. May we now have a second reading of ordinance number 99 in title only?
Prior to that,
I'm sorry,
Mr.
98.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yep.
believe we need to vote on 97 as amended.
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead of myself. Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance 97 as amended?
Mrs.
That's why I should never cross these off until we're out. When I cross it off, it's done. Mr. Smith, may we now have a second reading of ordinance number 98 in title only?
A second reading of ordinance number 98, 2021, 2022 Children and Youth Services Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I would like to amend this ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1 through 4. And vote as one.
Second?
We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Thank you. I would now entertain a motion as amended. Yes.
May I give you the updated balance?
Yes, if you have numbers for children and youth, please do.
So the updated balance for this fund will be $68,793,801.
$798.
$68,793,801.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, should we amend the face sheet now before we do final pass?
The,
Should we
I
do
believe
another
the
amendment?
amendment, or as amended, could include the face sheet since you know what that number is.
Should we have got that before we voted? Before we voted as amended, or?
You didn't quite do that yet. Mrs. Schwartzfager stopped you, so,
Oh, I thought we were going to vote as amended.
yes, sir. And that could include the amended amount of the fund budget, if you like.
Yes, but do we need another motion for that, or just to include? Should we have a motion for the number, the change of numbers?
I don't think it requires another motion. It can be included in the ordinance as amended.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, may we now have a roll call vote on ordinance number 98 as amended, including the face sheet?
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Sorry.
Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 99 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 99, 2021, 2022 Planning and Community Development Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to vote, to amend the ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1, 2, and 3. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also to vote as one.
Second?
We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter.
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes.
The updated total for this fund balance is $10,535,118.
Thank you for that number. Then I will ask for a motion for ordinance number 99 as amended.
So moved.
Second?
Thank you. The motion was made by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please, as amended?
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. I think that worked out better when Amy gave the number before we voted as amended. I think it was, so you can stop me then. Yeah, I think that was clean.
Mrs. Clear, I think, could also include in her amendment to amend with certain face sheets to include any change in a face sheet amount, if appropriate. If you wanted to just use that general language, that would lock in the intent.
Thank you. That would cover it. Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 100 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 100, 2021, 2022 Domestic Relations Fund Budget.
So moved?
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman?
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1 through 4, and also to include any changes to the face sheet amounts as well, if appropriate, and then also to vote as one. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Second?
Thank you. The amendment was made by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Chairman, the updated balance for this fund is $5,371,972.
Okay, thank you. Then I would ask for a motion on ordinance 100 as amended.
So moved?
Second?
We have the motion from Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote as amended?
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Next up, Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 101 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 101, 2021, 2022 Library Fund Budget.
So moved?
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman?
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1 through 7, also to update the face sheet amounts if appropriate, and also to vote as one. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I will second that.
Thank you. We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Then I would ask for a motion on ordinance number 101 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
The motion was made by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance number 101 as amended?
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 102 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 102, 2021, 2022 Public Health Fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to amend this ordinance to, thank you, to include action sheets numbers 1 through 5, to update the face sheet amounts if appropriate, and to vote as one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you. We have an amendment by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Do we have a change in numbers? Please go ahead.
Just want to confirm this is public health, correct?
Yes.
The updated amount is $14,130,548.
Thank you. I would ask for a motion to approve ordinance 102 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. The motion was made by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote as amended?
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 103 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 103, 2021, 2022 Public Safety Fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I would like to make a motion.
Please do.
I would like to amend the ordinance to include action sheets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Yes,
to also update the face sheet amounts if appropriate,
yes.
and finally to vote as one.
Thank you. We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I do not.
thank you.
Number?
Mr. Smith, may we have a roll, I'm sorry, do we have, Amy, do you have numbers for it?
Did you vote on the action sheets?
I'm messing
We
them up.
include it with the action sheets. We've been.
I think we have to vote on my.
I thought they had to vote on it.
No, we're voting on the amendment. So, Mr. Smith, may we have?
I beg your pardon.
a roll-
I beg your pardon. I
A roll-
beg your pardon.
A roll call vote on the amendment, please.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
The updated total for this fund is $9,286,036.
Thank you. I would ask for a motion on ordinance number 103 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you very much.
Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance 103 as amended?
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 104 in title only?
A second reading of ordinance number 104, 2021, 2022 gaming fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Councilwoman, Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include face sheets, or I'm sorry, I apologize, to include action sheets numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. However, I would like to, and also update the amounts on the face sheet if appropriate. I would, in this motion, I also want to include to vote numbers 1, 3, 4, and 5 as one item, and as number 2 as a separate vote.
Thank you for that motion. So the motion is to vote for action items 1, 3, 4, and 5 as one motion, and then we will take item number 2 as a separate motion.
So, second, I'm sorry, second.
Thank you. So we have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mr. Horton,
This is the vote to amend.
This is the amendment of sheets 1, 3, 4, and 5.
Okay, yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Thank you. I would accept a motion for action item number 2.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion for action item number 2 by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? So in this particular action item, we would be increasing the grant to the Erie Regional Chamber to $150,000, which is a $100,000 increase. So a yes vote would be to increase, a no vote not to increase. Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the motion for the action item?
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Since we did two separate items, two separate motions, should we combine them in the motion or just as amended?
I think it'd be fine as amended, if, along with any number change.
Okay, thank you. Amy, please go
The
ahead.
updated balance for this fund is $12,787,156.
Give that again, Amy.
$12,787,156. Just as a reminder to council, this number is on the cover sheet in each section under expenditures, if you want to see it.
Thank you. Then I would accept a motion for ordinance number 104 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Reddy, for ordinance 104 as amended. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance 104 as amended, please?
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 105 in title only, please?
The second reading of ordinance number 105, 2021, 2022 liquid fuels fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing no other action items in this particular fund, Amy, are there any changes in numbers? Thank you. Seeing no change in numbers, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the ordinance as presented?
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 106 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance 106, 2021, 2022 Pleasant Ridge Manor operating fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1 and 2, to update the face sheet amounts if appropriate, and to vote as one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
The updated total for this fund is $27,856,518.
Thank you. I would now accept a motion for ordinance 106 as amended.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Woman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie, to vote on 106 as amended. And are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we now have a reading of ordinance number 107 in title only?
Second reading of ordinance number 107, 2021, 2022 Pleasant Ridge Manor depreciation reserve fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include action sheet 1, to update the face sheet amounts if appropriate, and then to vote as one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes,
There's no change to the total.
thank you. I would now entertain a motion for 107 as amended.
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry, second.
We're patient. We're
I'm
patient
with
people here. We have a motion on 107 as amended by Councilwoman Rennie, seconded by Vice Chairwoman Clear. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on Ordinance 107 as amended?
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we now have a second reading of ordinance number 108 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 108, 2021, 2022 Erie County Care Management Budget.
So moved?
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1 through 3, to update the face sheet amounts if appropriate, and to vote as one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes.
There's no change to the total for this fund.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion for ordinance 108 as amended.
So moved?
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any final comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on ordinance number 108 as amended?
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. So, Mr. Smith, we're going to vote on these action items. We've included the ordinance, but we have to do a final passage on the ordinance. Is that correct? Or the motion that we made and the passage of the ordinance automatically includes the passage of the action items or failure of them? I think we amended it, and we added the language for the restrictions, but I think we have to read the action items and then make a motion as amended. for
I
a fi-
agree
for a
with that,
final.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Do we need a motion? I guess we need a motion to amend to begin with.
After my second reading, I believe, if I haven't done that yet.
So I'll ask for a motion, since this was one of the budgets that we just added because it had been left off, so we want to make sure we get it back in order here. So we'll ask for a second reading, and then the motion, and then the action item.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Could we have a second reading of ordinance number 121? I believe that's the number.
Yes, sir.
121 in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 121 of 2021, the 2022 American Rescue Plan Fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I would like to make a motion to amend this ordinance to include action sheets numbers 1 through 23, which will, and then also update the face sheet amounts if appropriate, but vote on them separately.
So with the action that we took in amending the ordinance, we don't need to vote on number 2. We can eliminate that. If you wouldn't mind taking that out of your motion.
Sure.
And then we began with 2, so we'd actually be beginning with 3.
And we don't need 1 either?
She's making the amendment. There was no 1.
There is a one.
There is, I don't have that sheet, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend my amendment. I would like to amend my motion. I would like to make a motion to amend then the ordinance to include action sheets 1 and then 3 through 23. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, was there not going to be a separate vote on
Yeah.
some of these?
Yeah, I think the first,
Well, I just had to add the action sheets, I thought, and then we vote on them separately.
I'm sorry.
Is that right?
no, let's make the motion for the to vote on action sheets. I think 6 through, or,
They're all supposed to be individual.
oh, we're going to do all of them individually?
My understanding.
Oh,
I thought we
That
got
was my
several of them
understanding.
grouped.
no, we're going to, yeah. That's why we took a,
I
sorry.
beg your pardon. Thank you.
I was just seeing
That's
if
the
Amy
next
was
section.
still on her toes.
It's been a long night.
Just seeing if she's still on her toes after she did all that extra work, so. We are going to actually vote on each of these individually, and so we could vote on 1, and then we took out 3. Those would have been the 2 that we would have lumped together. I mean, 2, we would have lumped 1 and 2 together.
Okay.
And then voted individually. So we can just vote on 1 individually, and then each action item individually, all the way
Okay.
through to the end. Yes.
Take a pause at the number 5.
Yes, thank you. So I would be looking for a motion to amend the ordinance to include action item number 3, for passage of action item number 3.
1 first, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I keep wanting to skip 1. Yes, 1.
So moved.
It's because I'm Carl the Third.
Second.
I think we have a motion on action item 1 by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Any comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on action item number 1?
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Now as I was asked to go through this with clarity, and when we got to them, A yes vote on number 3 would be to reduce, a no vote would not be, and the same thing for number 4. A yes vote would be to reduce, a no vote would be to not reduce, and then a yes vote would be number 5, to limit the time of the blue zone and the commitment, the contractual commitment of the 7 partners, and then we will take a break after those 3. So I would accept a motion first on action item number 3.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Councilwoman Rennie, please go ahead.
I know we spend a lot of time talking about this in an endless caucus. And I also know that there is a lot of money being proposed to this particular fund. And yes, it is a lot of money, and I understand there is concern. We also haven't had a chance to see what difference this will make in our community, the projects under this particular grant bucket of funding. And since we did vote on the restrictions of the funding, we still have the flexibility of looking at it again next year. And I would ask that my fellow council members and colleagues not hobble the program by prematurely reducing the funding at this time, but to give it a chance to see what it can do, to see what the people can do, to see what the commission members can do, and make a judgment from there as to its effectiveness. There is no reason to eliminate the funding at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions? I'm going to make similar comments, and that is I was proud to be one of the people to stand up and put the idea of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission together. And I have a great belief in its potential and great trust in the people that we have appointed to this particular board. However, as councils are changing with a new council and a new administration, and essentially what we're doing with this budget is earmarking funding for these particular programs, but the funding can be changed or eliminated. My fear is that there will be an attempt to eliminate the funding if we do not work in a similar vein to what we did last year and mirror each of the ARPA funding cycles that we've had before us. And so because I'm for this program and because I believe in their mission and because I believe that their success is going to go far beyond just the ARPA funding, I feel just the opposite of my colleague and perhaps some of the others, that for the strength and survival of this particular program, the funding needs to be reduced to mirror what was gone through in the first cycle. So I wish that realities were different. I wish that monies were unlimited in all of these areas, but the reality is they're not. And so I will be voting yes to reduce this particular item, even though it pains me to do so, and I know I will take great stress from others for doing so, but I truly believe that it will be the long-term right thing to do for the survival and the thriving of this particular commission. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilwoman Showerman.
I just wanted to go on record to say that I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you said. And I think at this point in time, we do need to mirror what we did last year. And just to make sure that some of this money is maintained and stays in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilman Horton, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to comment and take my mask down. So, to be clear, first of all, I want to thank you all for even pushing this far. Of course, I'm going to vote no, not to decrease the funding. I actually had a meeting with Black leadership about this issue this afternoon.
Microphone.
I actually had a meeting with Black leadership, a few pastors, a few center directors. I fully expect to get a lot of pushback on this. I'm not surprised, sadly. We have a history of being told things, promised things, never to see them come to fruition. I'm of the age where I was, raised where your word was bond. It meant something. Your yeas were your yeas, and your nays were your nays. We've had public announcement that we're giving this money to this commission. When I look at the total, $530 million budget, whatever it is, and I look and see what Black and brown communities are getting, it's almost criminal. It's appalling. It's embarrassing. And so now we get American Rescue Plan funds. We give $4 million to Erie County Gaming Revenue to administer something for us. We give another $3-4 million to Erie Redevelopment. I've been here 8 years. I've never seen so much scrutiny over line items unless they affect Black and brown people. That was the whole premise of the Resolution 43 of 2020. We voted for that. And then the next week, we turned around and voted against a diversity officer. I think that I agree with my colleague, Mrs. Rennie, that I don't think we should be hobbling a program before it even gets started. But the vote will be what it will be. I want to go on record saying that I don't believe it's right. I want to go on record as saying that in the next year, I'll be a little difficult. Things will be a little different. Should this not pass, and it looks like it won't, I hope we can still be proud of ourselves. I know that I'll have questions to answer when I go back. I'll direct them to you all. And finally, because we never really talk about party affiliation, we kind of pride ourselves at county, whereas the city, they don't have those issues. They have 7 Dems, and they kind of go. But I'm really saddened that Democrats will vote against this. Again, after I won't even talk about the 400 years. I'll just talk about the 200-year history of Erie, city of Erie and Erie County. Again, I'll reiterate. 1 out of every 3 Blacks live under the poverty level. Latinos are doing worse. Again, we have the 16501 zip code, poorest zip code in the entire United States. The median income for Black and brown families is right around $13,000, $16,000. White families is right around $50,000. something wrong. And I'll say this comment, not to be crass, but I don't throw rocks and hide my hand either. I find it troubling that a liaison to that commission will put forward an action sheet to take money from it before they even get started. It's very troubling. I don't think that I would want to be the liaison to something that I didn't believe in. That's just me. And so let's go on with the vote. But I guarantee you, just like with the college, you haven't heard the last of this. We're just getting started. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Horton. Vice Chairwoman Clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am going to be voting no to keep the $3 million, to keep it $6.5 million. And the reason for my vote is the spirit of the ARPA funding. I have been working with the ARPA funding since June of 2021 when the first regulations came out. And the spirit of this act has been recognized in inside and outside of the conversations that we've been having about this funding. We have approximately $53 million that have come to the county, and this is supposed to be money that is going to change the trajectory of our county. And we are only as strong as our weakest and poorest. Until we raise them, we will only go so far. I believe that this $6.5 million, coupled with the $3.5 million to equal $10 million, can start us on the path to do that. We can use this money to leverage so that it far surpasses the 2026 deadline. I want to do this for the future of Erie County, for the future of our residents, so that we can all rise to the level of our greatest potential. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairwoman Claire. Any other members of council? Finally, I'm going to say that my word is my bond from the first day I've come on this council until the last. I never committed to giving any more than $3.5 million. In fact, I encouraged and re-encouraged over and over again the county executive not to include any more than $3.5 million. I'm the council member who, working with others, negotiated the compromise and putting the whole thing together. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be discussing this diversity commission, and we wouldn't even be discussing its funding. So I walk away proud of knowing what we've created here, whether there's those who think that grabbing money now is the important thing to do, or building and having the opportunity to have this commission flourish into the future is going to be the right thing to do. I tend to believe that keeping something going long-term in this community and having the opportunity to leverage the funds that they're receiving with other organizations is much more important than being potentially completely defunded, where I will not be on this council and have the opportunity to step forward and defend or support or promote the advocacy for this particular commission. So I'm doing what I feel is right for the best of this community, whether the people in any part of the community recognize it or not. But I stand by every vote that I take. Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Could I add one thing?
The chair is the last to have comment from the dais, and I did
Actually,
I
any
did
council
let-
member can have a comment.
I did let everyone go around after I made comments. So, Mr. Smith, may we have a
Actually,
roll-
I don't think that's correct. I think
we-
that any council person can make a comment as
May-
long
may
as the
we
vote
have a-
hasn't been voted on, and we're still in discussion. And so I have some further comments to make because, first of
Mr.
all,
Smith, may
I
we
don't
have
like
a
to
roll-
start
may
talking
we have a
about
roll
what
call
I
vote?
did or what
May we have
and
a
I
roll
beg
call
to
vote?
differ with you, although you played a major part in
Thank you.
it.
You're-
This is
you're out
not
of order,
anything
Mr.
that
Gordon.
one person
Mr. Smith,
can put
may we have a
together.
roll call vote,
And
please?
so I'm sure, I'm positive that everybody up here is doing their best. I don't take that from you, but I won't let you sit up here and say that,
I-
you're
I
responsible.
said myself and my
You're
colleagues.
responsible.
Thank you.
Because we
Mr.
talked.
Smith, may we have a roll call?
Well, he's going
please?
to have a roll call, but I'm going to be heard first. I'm going to be heard first. Yeah, I take issue with it. Anyone that would suggest that they are the reason that this is here.
We take issue with
This
you
is
being
here.
out of order.
I'm not out of order. I'm a member of county council, and we're in the discussion phase of a motion
We're past
that hasn't been
discussion.
voted on. And this is the place where we discuss. If you want to have some last words as the chair, then you do that. But you can't limit anyone, 7 of us, from speaking.
That's the way council has always
No.
acted.
No. No,
yeah,
we're going to
yeah.
vote on it, but I'm always leery when people say I. And just for the record, the community was involved in this, too. Community had a lot of input in this. I don't know what meetings you had upstairs on the 5th floor, but the community had a lot to do with this as well. And so I want to go on the record as saying that I take umbrage with that. Nobody pat yourself on the back like, here, we're 7. We fail together, we succeed together.
Thank you. That's exactly what I said. Myself and my colleagues. Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. Mr. Smith, may we have could we have a motion on action item number 4?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion for action item number 4, by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes. I would accept a motion for action item number 5.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Motion fails.
That was a routine.
as I explained, a yes
To
vote.
reduce and no to keep.
A yes vote is to, is that a question you're asking?
Please, yeah.
A yes vote was to accept this restriction, that the Blue Zone and the partners must contractually commit by February, or the funds will revert back uncommitted. A no vote would be to continue funding the Blue Zone project.
Okay, that's good. Mine says to retain the community college expense line.
I think you,
Action sheet 5, Mr. Rastetter?
It says to retain community college expense line.
Oops.
Nicole printed that just for me.
Mr. Rossiter, did you switch the new sheet to the old sheet?
Yeah. I tore the old sheets out, they're torn. And, yeah, there was another one back here that was wrong, too.
Mr. Rossiter,
I
we're
caught
doing
it.
the general fund instead of
yeah, I think you moved forward from the,
American Rescue Plan Act.
Is that what it is? Well, whatever, I'm leaving my vote the way it is.
With the actions that passed, action sheet 6
Okay.
should now read a decrease of 100,000 instead of 186,667. And action sheet 8 should read a decrease of 3.5 million instead of a decrease of 6.5 million.
I'm sorry, action item
So, action item
8.
8 should now read a decrease of 3.5 million instead of 6.5 million. And action sheet 6 should read a total decrease of 100,000. I will create updated copies of those for you, Mr. Smith.
The action item in number 4 was to decrease the amount 86,000, resulting in $100,000 in the line item. So, in number 6, if we're reducing that by 100,000, it would be 86,667.
Reduced to 100,000, so the total for action sheet 6 now reads 100,000.
100, okay,
The professional fees line is reduced to 70,000,
gotcha.
so that the total of that action sheet is 100,000.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Could you say that about professional fees?
For action sheet number 6, this action sheet should council choose to is to eliminate the funding for the community futures fund. Since action number 4 passed to reduce the professional fees by 86,667, I updated action sheet 6 so that the professional fees line reads 70,000, so that the total for the fund, should it council want to eliminate it, would be 100,000 instead of the 186,667.
Thank you.
So a no vote is to keep it, and a yes vote is to reduce it further.
And that will be the case for 6 through 22. A yes vote is to eliminate the line item, and a no vote is to keep it.
So for number 7. Pardon me, do I have permission to speak? Amy, so for number 6, a no vote, you were saying, is to
Okay, so for numbers 6 through 22.
6 through 22.
Each of those are, the wording is to eliminate that line item. So
Okay.
yes would be to eliminate the line item,
No is to keep. I just wanted to, okay, so no is to keep it in the budget. Okay, thank you.
Yes is no and no is yes.
Live.
Let's continue on then with action item number 6. Remember that a yes would eliminate funding, a no would keep funding.
And you need a motion, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, so moved? Is that what we need from me?
Move action sheet number 6, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Madam Vice Chair.
I think I'd like to make a motion
Please do.
to vote on number 6.
Is that action item?
Action item. Action item number 6.
Thank you.
I will second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman
Oh,
Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a quick question. I know this is to eliminate funding. Is this to eliminate all funding or to eliminate in just the lines mentioned earlier?
No, so not, in voting in this, we would be eliminating, if you vote yes to eliminate, it would be eliminating all funding in these particular account.
Not just the amendment?
Right, not just the amendment.
Thank you.
Yes. So a yes vote would keep $100,000 in the Community Future Center
No.
budget. Yes, a no would keep it.
Looks like
I
a
know
yes
what
would
keep-
decrease that, right?
That's correct.
Yes, is to eliminate.
It's decreased to 100. Yeah, they decreased it by 100,000.
If you vote no, you keep it.
Vote no, you keep it. It's in
The
decrease,
remaining 100,000.
but
To
wait,
to
it's
eliminate,
in the
a yes vote would eliminate
and a vote
funding.
no would be to
A
keep
no
it.
vote
Correct.
would keep it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
That's the way that number 6 through 22 are written.
Yep. Agree.
Okay? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
On action sheet 6, Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No,
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
I thought I was going to get to vote twice.
Had a good comeback, but I shouldn't say it.
So I would look for a motion for action item number 7.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie on action item number 7. Remember, a yes vote eliminates the funding, a no vote retains the funding. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
no,
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 8.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just so that I'm clear, is this, the number was decreased, Ms.
The
Swartzbaker?
number passed to decrease, yes, to 3.5 million. So
Okay.
a yes vote would eliminate that amount to 0. A no vote would retain it at 3.5 million.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the clarification.
Any further comments or questions? Mr.
Yes.
Smith, Councilman Raster.
Say that again. No vote would leave it as is?
A no vote would leave it at,
To decrease it by 600.
no, a no vote would,
6,000,005.
no, a no vote would, we've decreased it by the other vote to 3.5 million.
Right.
So a no vote would keep it at 3.5 million. A
Okay.
yes vote would eliminate it to 0.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Quinn.
I know there's no one here to listen but us, but I would like to just put it on record that I do hope that this funding stays in the American Rescue Plan and does get used for the DEI Commission. I know it'll be up to council next year and I won't be here, but I'd like to just put that out there. That I yes, I would have liked 6.5 million, but if we can give 3.5 million, I'm going to encourage the next county executive to retain this funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I too would like to make some comments to say that I strongly hope that this funding is retained. As I've said earlier, it is my hope by making this reduction that is the compromise that we've made, and that there is no further decrease to the funding, nor is it diverted to any other program, because I believe in what the DEI Commission is doing and can do in the future. So thank you, Mr. Smith. May we have a roll call vote?
On action sheet 8, Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
Well, I want to say that I never agreed to a $10 million for the DEI. It was 3.5 originally, and this was brought in later by the county executive. But anyhow, I'm going to vote yes to eliminate in hopes that that saves the whole plan for the DEI.
Yes
Right.
means you do away with the money.
That's
It
right.
goes back to 0.
That's right. Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
So.
Action item number 9. I would look for a motion.
So moved?
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any future comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote? And please remember, a yes vote eliminates the funding, a no vote retains the funding.
on action sheet 9, Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
fails.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to vote on action sheet number 10.
Thank you.
Second?
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
On action sheet 10, Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No. I kind of like the way we did it. We don't get a chance to say no too often. Good way to switch things up a little.
Most of the time, you say, no, you're the bad guy.
We are now on to action item number 11.
So moved.
Second?
So we have a motion to move forward action item 11 by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
fails.
It is certainly imperative, if not critical, that the tuition waiver and the funding and the momentum that this council has created for the community college continues forward. And it is my hope that as we've unanimously reaffirmed our support for that funding, that this funding will continue to stay in place next year and in years to come, as I believe the community college is proving itself as a game changer in our community. Mr. Smith, I'm sorry, I would take a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear for action item 12.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second?
So we have the motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 13.
Second?
We have a motion by Councilwoman Vice Chair Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? This is an item that was included in funding. If there's any item that has changed in the ARPA funding from the first to the second, it was moving away from any future grant money for the convention center or Pleasant Ridge Manor, and that a critical component of coming out of the pandemic, of something that is affecting our community in a very negative light and affecting the lives of the people caught up in homelessness, is to put money towards programs to help people in a homeless situation. And in working with the home team and the administration and the Director of Human Services, setting aside this fund is hoped to be matched with funding from the City of Erie and other sources to make a real impact on the homelessness in our community. So this is something I'm certainly going to support to continue the funding. With no other comments or questions, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
on action sheet 13, Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Chairman Anderson,
No.
fails.
Moving on to action item number 14.
So moved? Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Vice Chairwoman.
I would like to make a motion to vote on action item number 14.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Horton?
No.
Mr. Rastetter?
No.
Mrs. Rennie?
No.
Mrs. Showerman?
No.
Mr. Shank?
No.
Mrs. Clear?
No.
Chairman Anderson?
No.
Fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 15.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Rastetter?
No.
Mrs. Rennie?
No.
Mrs. Showerman?
No.
Mr. Shank?
No.
Mrs. Clear?
No.
Mr. Horton?
No.
Chairman Anderson?
No.
Fails.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a
Vice
motion.
Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 16.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
On action sheet 16, Mrs. Rennie?
No.
Mrs. Showerman?
No.
Mr. Shank?
No.
Mrs. Clear?
No.
Mr. Horton?
No.
Mr. Rastetter?
No.
Chairman Anderson?
No.
Item fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 17.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Showerman?
No.
Mr. Shank?
No.
Mrs. Clear?
No.
Mr. Horton?
No.
Mr. Rastetter?
No.
Mrs. Rennie?
No.
Chairman Anderson?
No.
Fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 18.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council on this particular item? I just want to make a quick comment here that I've been a believer in the blue zones, and it was our original goal to give the administration more time to be able to try and find the partners, the 7 partners needed to fund the blue zones. But we failed in an earlier motion to continue to give them that time to the end of February of 2022. So I am going to vote yes on this particular item because I believe enough time has been given. And there are no partners that have stepped forward to fund the Blue Zone initiative at $1.5 million. This will not affect the program that is presently in place in Corey. This was to expand a program north of I-90. The city of Erie was approached to be the lead in this particular initiative, and they turned the county down. And so I think tying these funds up in a project that really isn't going to move forward is not what we should do with the ARPA funds. So, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
On action sheet 18, Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
No.
Mr. Horton?
No.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
No.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes.
Sheet passes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 19.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council on this particular item? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
On action sheet 19, Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
No.
Item fails.
Amy, did you need time to catch up from the last one, or did you catch up with that?
I am caught up, Chairman, but I am concerned about action sheet 22. I've been mulling it over, and I would recommend pulling it. So this action was to eliminate this line item, but it's already into the fund balance, so there's nowhere else for it to go. So I would recommend that we pull action sheet 22, because it's not an expense line item. It's already appropriated.
To the fund balance of this bureau. So we could pull it, or what if we vote yes to, you want us to vote yes to eliminate, or vote no to not
I
eliminate?
would vote no to just not, you can also just vote no.
Okay.
Yes is to eliminate.
Yes is to eliminate, yes, then you would want to vote yes.
Welcome to our world.
You want us to eliminate this fund balance?
No, I want you to know.
Right, so you want us
We
to
want
vote
leave
no?
it be-
Okay.
to be a no.
All right, instead of pulling it, why don't we just vote, if no, vote no, and then that'll keep it.
Okay, okay.
Thank you. My
Okay.
apologies.
No, that's okay, thank you.
So we're going with no, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
When we get to 22.
22.
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 20.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council on this particular item? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
No.
Item fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 21.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie on action item number 21. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
No.
Item fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 22.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council on this particular item? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
No.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
No.
Item fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 23.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would just like to point out that a yes is to include those 4 items.
That is correct. Thank you
Thank you.
for that clarity.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
On action sheet 23, Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Item passes.
Thank you. Amy, do you need time for any change to the face sheet?
The updated total expenditures for the Erie County Plan Act Fund is $20,232,418.
$20,242,418. Boy, my kids keep saying it, but it's happening. I'm going down.
I'm going to sleep.
Mr. Smith, may we now seek a motion for ordinance number 121 as amended and including the amendment to the face sheet?
So moved.
Second.
So moved?
So.
Would you mind reading your motion to it? So we're amending
Oh.
121. And
I would like to make a motion to amend, or to vote on the amended ordinance number 121 and the amendments to the face sheet
as appropriate.
as appropriate.
Yeah, whatever you say.
Oh. I'd like to amend the ordinance to include all the action sheets and to amend the ordinance based on all of the votes we just did and update the face sheet amounts as appropriate and vote as one.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any last comments or questions on ordinance number 121?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just be very quick because I know we're like way late right now. But I will say that I was very proud to do all the work that we've done this year. I think Mr. Horton mentioned that we've been working. Yes, I guess the legislation came in in June, but we've been working since January when you created the commission or our group, and we had all of those meetings. We had meetings once a week for months and months and months with stakeholders inside of Erie County. We had experts come from outside Erie County. We did a lot of work to get to this point. The county executive held meetings with stakeholders throughout the entire county in hopes of coming together so that we would maybe use our funding and leverage it to use for the greater good. But I know that when we worked together, we came up with some really, really great ideas that I do think will help this community. So I'm very happy that we were able to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make further comments to that and say that we don't always agree with the bottom line of what we're attempting to achieve, but we do a pretty damn good job of it in Erie County in coming together in unity and in moving projects forward. We are one of the few counties in the entire country that has their act together in the ARPA funding, not only in the first round, but certainly in the second round. And I believe we've done some real forward-thinking and progressive program. And that's all of us working together from everything that you've mentioned, Vice Chairwoman Clear, to working with the administration and many others throughout the community. Next year, the word is that the federal government and the elected officials in the federal government are going to eliminate any criteria within the ARPA funding, and so 100% of the ARPA funding will essentially be revenue replacement. That is one of the things that we need to stay vigilant about and stay committed and disciplined to the programs that we've put forward, and I think we've put them forward in a fair manner with fair funding, and those are programs that I certainly hope will be viewed by the next council and the next administration as put together in a fair and equitable manner on behalf of the citizens of all of Erie County. So, there'll be other people that will be the decision makers on the final release of those funds. I just hope that they view the stewardship and the commitment that this council has made and follow through with those programs. So with that said, Mr. Smith, may we have a final roll call vote on the ordinance number 121 as amended?
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. Next, Mr. Smith, may we have a second reading of ordinance number 109 in title only, please?
A second reading of ordinance number 109, 2021, the 2022 general fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are
Mr.
there
Chair-
any comments or questions from members of council?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I would like to make a motion to vote on items 1 through 38 and vote on items 8, 12, 37, and 39 individually. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I would like to second that.
Thank you. We have a motion to amend by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on the amendment?
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. Thank you. I would now accept a motion on action item number 8.
Oh, I'm sorry. So moved.
Second.
Sorry about that.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie on action item number 8. Are there any comments or questions by members of council? And now we're back to a yes means yes and a no is no vote. So,
I have to make a comment, Chairman.
uh,
It's nice to have the world upside right again. But no, I mean, I looked at this thing and I see it's a nice fancy tool, but when we're supposed to be very conscious of our taxpayers' dollars and what we're doing with it, I think this is like getting heated seats on a new car. It's a nice option, but I just don't see us spending the money on it right now. I don't see a lot of gain from it, and I won't support it. I yield back.
thank you. Are there any further questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilwoman Rennie?
I just wanted to say that this is no ordinary time when it comes to elections. And right now, elections needs heated seats and a heated steering wheel and all the dials and levers that it can possibly get. We need to invest in our elections. We need to know that the face that we present forward to the public is one that is capable, competent, has integrity, all of those things that is so under attack today. And so I will be voting in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on action item number 8?
Mr. Horton,
Well, it's December and I like heated seats, so I guess I'll vote yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
No.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, or Chairman, whoever you are. I can't see straight anymore.
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I would like to make a motion to vote on action item number 12.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie on action item number 12. Are there any comments or questions from members of council on this particular item? I am going to make some comments. Last year, we voted the diversity position down because we felt the county executive didn't come forward with a detailed plan. But since then, working with the administration and council, we did come forward with a plan, and we passed the creation of the diversity office and increasing that office by one person to have the support there for the diversity officer, who I understand, I believe has just been put in place not too long ago. And I think he's going to be a real dynamic asset to Erie County. So I am going to vote no on this to not remove the funding for this particular position.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yeah.
have a clarity question.
Yes, please.
Was this
Councilwoman
not
Shower.
for the second position? I thought this was for a second position.
Right, they created the diversity officer position and then one other position to work with the diversity officer. That was creating essentially what would be the diversity bureau. So initially they were going to create 2 positions, but the administration cut one position out. So this is adding one position, but it was intended to add a position to be an assistant to the diversity officer. And I believe this action sheet is removing that position of the diversity officer and then the second person that would be in that office.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm unclear. So this position, if someone votes yes to this position,
You're voting yes to remove.
to eliminate it?
Correct.
Okay. Voting no, and that is for the one position. So right now, there's one diversity officer. This is approving the diversity officer there.
No, the assistant to the diversity officer.
This is
So
to
this
the-
would be the inclusion specialist, not the diversity director.
Okay. Got it.
But initially, when we talked about this with the administration and creating essentially a bureau of diversity to work with the diversity commission, there was going to be a total of 3 positions the director, and then essentially 2 specialists. County executive cut one of the specialists in her preliminary budget and only put 1 forward. So it would be the director and a specialist.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification, and thank you for the question, Ms. Showerman.
Mr. Smith, if I'm completely wrong, let me know. So,
I just believe there are 3 positions in the budget, Mr. Chairman, currently.
no, there was 2. Because we eliminated the 1. Good. Yes, we were going to put it in. We negotiated putting it in, but then she had cut 1 at the last minute.
So,
Then I beg your pardon.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Director, Chairman, it's Human Resources positions, 2,209, and then 2,210. 9 is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and that position is currently filled. And the DEI Specialist, which is position number 10, is what this action sheet is, you're voting to remove it.
Correct. So a yes vote removes it, a no vote retains it in the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay? Any further clarity?
That
Okay.
clarified it, thank you.
Yep. Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
On action sheet 12, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes,
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
No.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Chairman Anderson.
No.
Action fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Clear?
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item 37.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie, on voting on action item number 37. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council on this particular item?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilwoman Clear?
just so that I'm clear, we voted this in a different section, which is why we're able to vote on it now. Is that correct?
Yes, we voted in the gaming fund to allocate the money to increase it, the $100,000. This would actually increase it. So a no vote could still make it fail. A yes vote would increase it by $100,000 to $150,000.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So it's not an additional 100,000 on top of the gaming 100,000?
That's correct. This includes,
This is the same?
Yes,
It's
yes.
just we're putting it to a different place?
yes.
Okay,
It says the increase is a transfer
okay.
from the gaming fund if we voted that through, which we did.
That's what I had in my head. I just needed to make sure that that was correct and make it clear for everyone else too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilman Horton?
Yeah, I did vote to support that, but I won't support this. I think we've already given the chamber $150,000 for workforce. And me personally, I haven't seen it demonstrate any success on a number of things. Every time they come here, it's a money ask, or to tell us the jobs are leaving, or to present something to us. And so I'm 150,000 is one, but I don't want to double up, so I won't support this.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote on action item number 37?
Mrs. Rennie,
No.
Mrs. Showerman,
yes,
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Vice Chairwoman Clear.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on action item number 39.
Second?
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any other comments or questions from members of council on this particular item?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilwoman Rennie?
this item was also separate. It was contained in another part of the budget for the gaming funds as well, I believe. And at the time that we did this, we put it in with other action sheets and voted collectively on them yes. Originally, I had intended to vote no on this, but I am going to switch my vote to yes on this particular line. However, I do want to state again for the record that we are overexpending the gaming revenue line. We can't be everything to the community. We can't meet every single need out there. And I think for the future, we do need to look more critically at the funding that we provide for community organizations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councilman Horton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Judicial Investment Program was founded by then President Judge John Trussillo. Adult juvenile probation at the time was Bill Blakey on Michael West. The program has made great strides. I think they came here twice before for funding, and the last time they came was last year. COVID hit, and they had an issue getting their paperwork together. So I came and asked that they put this back in. Last year when they came, they said that it would be a one-time. They wanted a one-time award. Since then, they've separated from the county and set up some things in place for it to be sustainable. I think it's with the youth violence this escalating in the partnership that they have with, actually it's with the city of Erie, both adult juvenile probation, Widget Financial, a couple other entities. And I had the opportunity to go and sit in on one of the cohorts. And, you know, they bring different trades people in, or they try to expose the young men. It's a program for men designated. I'd like to see it go women. But they try to take these, they take half the kids from probation, juvenile probation, and they take half the kids from the community, and they put them together. They do a 10-week course. At the end of the 10 weeks, they require them to do a community service project. It's probably one of the more meaningful things I've seen juvenile probation do. So I will be supporting this.
Any other comments or questions from members of council? I do want to say that I too am going to support this. I am concerned at the way it came down, although I understand and have had an opportunity to speak with the people, particularly during the COVID pandemic. The 501c3 status was delayed, and my understanding is the grant that we gave them last year, they did not take any funding from because they didn't have the 501c3 in place. So this is essentially replacing the money that we gave them last year. I know that council members have frowned on making exceptions to the council grant program. We've been pretty stringent on having the applications come in between July 1 and July 31st. But this organization had anticipated, because we funded them last year, that they were going to draw on the funds that we had set aside for them. But because they were delayed, they couldn't draw in the funds. And so as Councilman Horton said, it was meant to be a one-time ask. And so they missed the deadline because they weren't going to apply for future grants. But then they still had not received the proper paperwork, and so, as I mentioned, did not draw on the funds. So I view this as a continuation of the commitment that council made last year and following through with that, but would caution organizations in the future to make sure that they file the application during the time period of the grant application, and that council making exceptions has done that on one-time funding and not continual funding. So as I said, I will support this for those reasons. And with that said, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
On action sheet 39, Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Chairman,
Yes.
I would like to give an update on action sheet number 40. You do not have a copy of it because I had to wait to prepare it. This is an action sheet for transfers, and it accounts for the change in the transfers from all the funds that were previously passed. So this action sheet is going to have a decrease to the domestic relations fund of $5,113.
Do you want to prepare it or just
I have it.
just read it for? I mean, do you want to print it off or just read it to us? Yeah, I mean that's fine if everyone will accept it being read to us. And-
Please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
The domestic relations fund had a decrease in general fund appropriated of $5,113. The children and youth fund had an increase in the general fund appropriation of $20,200. Planning fund had a decrease in the general fund appropriation of $7,600. The library fund had a decrease in the general fund appropriation of $3,249. Public health fund had a decrease in general fund appropriation of $91,238. The public safety fund had an increase in the general fund appropriation of $271,641. And Pleasant Ridge Manor had a decrease in the general fund appropriation of $500,000. This nets to a total increase of expenditures of $291,841 and a total decrease in expenditures of $607,200. And that creates a net decrease of $315,359. So the vote would be to accept those changes of the money going in and out from the general fund on action sheet 40.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to vote on the net decrease of $315,359. Thank you.
We would be voting on the action item for all the changes, correct? Not just the final number. So would you?
Okay, sure. Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I would like to make a motion to vote on action sheet number 40, all of the increases and all of the decreases given by our accountant, Miss Amy Schwartzberger. And, okay.
Second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any further comments or questions from members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote?
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would now like to vote on items 1 through 40, except items 8, 12, 37, 39, and 40.
We already did all
Oh,
that. So, yes.
As
go ahead.
amended, ma'am.
oh,
Yeah, you just need to say it.
oh, sorry.
We'll-
I'd like to vote on
Ordinance
ordinance
109.
109 as amended,
With the change to the page.
with all the changes to the face sheet and action sheets.
Chairman, the updated expenditure amount for the general fund is $115,461,077. 115,461,077.
Okay.
We'll
So,
reference that as a net decrease of 121,059 from where we started.
wow.
Would you say that once again, a net decrease of what?
121,059. That is all of our action sheet combined. The net effect on the general fund.
We saved money. It's like we had coupons.
Coupons.
Before we do the final vote on the general fund, do we have to balance the budget by what we're taking out of the fund balance?
Mr. Chairman, the way the ordinance is written is that the fund balance cannot be pulled below the 2 months amount. That requirement, based on current numbers, is $19,243,513. The current fund balance is $45,419,538. It's my understanding that money has not been pulled from fund balance this year, and the current budget is not enough to reduce below that 2-month mark, so I believe that it is okay. That is my understanding of everything in the ordinance.
Yes. So, it's my understanding that it's the consensus of council from the funds that the county executive has used to balance, which I believe is 1.4 million fund balance, plus the adjustments that we're making, that we've made, whether it's up or down from that amount, but we still need to balance with the fund balance, the actual number of fund balance, which we have to balance the fund. Because when we do the tax levy, we're just gonna keep it the same rate as last year. Correct, we're not doing the tax increase.
I'm wondering, Mr. Chairman, if by passing all the fund budgets as you have, that the net effect would be to take from the fund balance if you don't increase the tax levy.
Okay, so we don't need to.
I don't believe you need to vote separately on the matter.
The exact number, by not raising taxes, it will automatically adjust.
That's correct, sir.
Need to do the exact number. Okay, thank you. So I believe the motion covered the changes in the numbers to the base sheet and to the amounts that were decreased in the general fund and all of the action items. I don't think we missed anything. So unless there's any further comments or questions, Mr. Smith, I think we would be ready for a roll call vote on the general fund as amended.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs.
Actually,
Rennie?
I'm going to stop because I think we need to vote on her amendment, right, before we vote on the general fund as amended. So I better catch
I think we already did all the amendments as we went through,
Yeah, but you made a motion to vote
as amended.
as amended. So we're voting on the ordinance as amended, not,
Yes, sir.
okay, thanks, so we're clear. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. So Amy, if we are not changing the tax levy, do you need time to do any readjustments, or do you have that number?
The,
Basically, how much fund balance we're planning on spending. That's the balance of the budget.
that is $1,341,556.
No, I mean, we have to set the last,
The millage would be 5.96.
right, so that's the number for the last ordinance that we need.
What number, ma'am?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
so that's the same. We're not raising the millage.
correct. It's the same millage as
Okay.
last year. The consensus was not to raise taxes.
Yes, correct.
So don't we need to make a motion in the tax levy ordinance of the millage number to reflect the same as last year? It's in there. So since we're not changing it, it's in there,
5.96 is what you have.
is what you have in there.
I would do a reading as you request,
Okay.
and then council can vote it up or down.
Thank you. Then, Mr. Smith, can we have a second reading of ordinance number 110, the tax levy? Could you read the tax levy rate?
The second reading of ordinance number 110, 2021, the 2022 real estate tax levy.
So moved.
Be it enacted by the County Council of the County of Erie pursuant to Article 2, Sections 1C4, 3B2D, and 3C1, and Article 8, Section 3 through 6 of the Home Rule Charter for the County of Erie, that the real estate tax for calendar year January 1 through December 31 of 2022 is hereby levied at a rate of 5.96 mils on each dollar of assessed value, or at a rate of 0.96 rather, on each $100 of assessed value thereof.
Is it 100 or 100,000?
0.596 on each $100 of assessed value.
Thank you.
So moved? Okay.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chairwoman Clear, seconded by Councilwoman Rennie. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Before we take this final vote, I just want to congratulate my colleagues and certainly our staff and our financial advisor for all the work that you've done. The finance department, the county executive and her administration. It is a feat and certainly a benefit to the taxpayers of Erie County to know the financial strength that we're in and that we're in a position not to have to raise taxes, leaving the millage rate as it was from last year. So I want to congratulate all of my colleagues for the work on the 2022 budget. And Mr. Smith, may we have a roll call vote, please?
On ordinance 110, Mr. Horton? Yes. Mr. Rastetter?
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie?
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman?
Yes.
Mr. Shank?
Yes.
Mrs. Clear?
Yes, yes, yes.
Chairman Anderson?
Yes. Thank you to everybody for your patience and your work. The next meeting of council will be our Finance Personnel Committee meeting on Thursday, December 9th at 4 p.m. in the caucus room behind us. And the next regularly scheduled meeting of County Council will be December 14th at 6 p.m. in the courthouse room here, 117. If there's no other business to come before the council, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.